There's a lot of rumors and conversations floating around right now about next gen. Phil Spencer did a really good interview just recently with Giant Bomb right after E3. This interview was a very well put together sit-down interview where it felt like Phil Spencer was able to be comfortable and genuine in his responses. In this interview, he actually discussed Project Scarlet, and we're actually going to break down that interview and talk about some of the details of next gen right now. What's going on, everybody? This is LegionofGamer.com's Centurion1307, and I'm hoping this video today is going to clear up a few things about next gen and a few things about how Phil Spencer feels about next gen. So let's get this started. So when the dust was still settling on the E3 stage, Phil Spencer went in and did an interview with Giant Bomb. It was nice to see Phil Spencer take off the corporate jacket and put on his gamer jacket and sit down and talk to us like he was just one of us. One of the first things he states in this interview is that he's actually pretty passive in this supposed console wars. He doesn't want to see other companies suffer and go out of business just because he becomes successful. Gaming is a better space with brands that people trust that have been around for decades and that will continue to be around. He then goes into how he wants to grow the gaming industry as a whole. He doesn't just want it to be one person gets a green box and another person gets a blue box and nobody can play together, because that actually makes it to where the gaming industry suffers. And the main proponent of the industry that he looks at is the consumer. When the consumer can't play with another consumer, he sees it as a disadvantage to the gaming industry and actually a loss. He sees it to where everybody should be able to game together no matter what ecosystem you choose to play on. But he also says he will not deny the fact that for there to be a winner, there has to be a loser. But when he thinks about the loser, he doesn't want it to be because they lost their money. He wants it to be because they sold one less fewer console than he did, but that they sold more consoles than they ever have. He wants it to where everybody comes together to improve gaming, but there will be areas for them to compete in. He did state that he is not building Project Scarlet to not be number one. At the end of the day, he aims to be number one in power, experience, and services. He also makes comments towards as he does not have a PS5 dev kit at his disposal, so he only has control over the console that he is building, Project Scarlet. Before we get too deep into the differences of Project Scarlet and the PS5, let's talk about some of the similarities that are going to be between the two consoles. Both consoles are going to have a Zen 2 multi-chip architecture. They're also getting GDDR6, which is a graphics data rate. This is the data that the hardware of the console uses to convert graphics into the visual image that you see. GDDR6 is double the data rate of GDDR5 and requires less power draw on the system's hardware. Both consoles are receiving a console first. They're both getting an SSD hard drive to improve efficiency and load times across all systems on the hardware. Both consoles are trying to reduce load times and boot times to near nothing. Both consoles are also aiming to have a locked native 4K resolution at 60 frames per second. They're even both boasting that they can hit 8K at 120 frames per second, but this is probably only going to be possible on games with little to no demand, like an indie title or a racing title. That does it for what these consoles have in common. Now it's time to start talking about where the differences are starting to emerge between the two, starting with the PS5. Please keep in mind, I am going to try to be as factual as possible with the little bit of information that has been released about both consoles. This information could change because both companies are locked into a giant game of chess waiting for another one to release more information about their console. With the information available to me at the time of this video, both using PS5 statements and AMD statements, I can figure out a few things. It looks like the PS5 is going to use a Generation 1 AMD Navi RDNA graphics chip that has 8 cores inside it. Along with these cores is a software-based ray tracing technology, and they're also touting audio ray tracing as well. Audio ray tracing and ray tracing themselves are the same principle. For those who don't really understand it, ray tracing is the ability for you to see where light and sound is coming from. When you hear somebody shoot a gun, you want to hear it come from the perspective direction. When the sun is behind you, you want to feel like it's behind you and not on top of you. The reason why I point out that the ray tracing is software based is that it will be a load on the graphics chip that will have to be shared with the other processes of the console. Think of it as having one employee to do all the jobs and you just put more jobs on them. The employee can only do so much before it affects productivity. At this point, from the way it looks, the PS5 is going for the mantra of price over performance, but it looks like Xbox is going to do the exact opposite, putting performance over price. Project Scarlet plans to use the same size 7nm chip produced by AMD, but it uses the RDNA 2 technology. This chip has 12 cores in it, and instead of being software-based ray tracing, it is hardware-based ray tracing. There is one solid core to perform this entire process alone. I also must point out that it is 7nm plus, unlike the PlayStation 5's locked 7nm. Just in case you were wondering what that is, it's an upgrade over the original Generation 1 chip. AMD plans in the future to use the cloud to help increase the compute capacity of this chip infinitely, but it appears as if this extra computing power is going to be pushed towards ray tracing primarily. I am curious though on how this is going to work for somebody with little to no internet connection in using this feature. Microsoft, in their reveal of Project Scarlet, is touting that this will give the console 4 times the processing power of the Xbox One X. A little bit of information was shown on an individual's Twitter account that superimposed the product codes on top of the chips in these photos. And not too many people will be able to read the tweet the way it is, as it's in a different language, but we'll do a little bit of an English translation. What you're staring at in the top photo is the UPC code for a Samsung 2GB RAM chip. In the bottom photo, you will see that there are 12 of them on the board, giving it a total of 24 gigs of RAM. These photos and statements have YouTube creators like myself going crazy, wanting to know more about the specs of this console. And if those rumors turn out to be true, there's even more interesting information on the available memory for this console. Xbox is touting in their preview of Project Scarlet that it is going to have virtual RAM. What this means is that if the game you're playing fills up the available RAM on the console, it will then use the SSD hard drive in its place to do more computing. I bring up the power in computing because there's a lot of individuals as of late going around talking about the power of Project Scarlet versus the power of the PS5 based purely on the dev kits. Dev kits are designed and built overpowered, period. They are nothing like what we consumers will buy in store. So to try to make a connection on the power of a console based on its dev kit is completely impossible and not a good way of trying to do it. Albert Pinello, a former Microsoft executive, came out recently and talked about this, stating that the chipsets were not ready yet for either console, so it is too early to tell for either console. But it is entirely possible for, on paper, for the PS5 to appear more powerful than the Xbox Scarlet. But that is as a result of the two technologies that are being used in these consoles. RDNA 1 cannot be mathematically calculated the same way as RDNA 2. RDNA 2 has an actual bigger bandwidth to it, so it's actually got a faster processing power. As a result of this main difference, the calculations on how powerful the console is are done differently between the PS5 and the Xbox Scarlet. If you take notice in how Phil Spencer talks about Project Scarlet, he talks about it as a more immersive experience. Immersive in being that the world around you will have more physical elements that react to you that could also improve AI capabilities when it comes to fighting NPCs. Imagine walking through a virtual forest on the Xbox Scarlet and the bushes and the trees and the limbs on them react to your character the way they should in real life. Or walking through a dusty room and as you walk around, the dust under your feet puffs away, enters the air, and reacts like real dust. Now these are just a few tidbits of information that I was able to piece together from articles all over the internet from semi-reputable sources, especially those sources from Sony, Microsoft, and AMD. Tell me what you think down below. I am not trying to create a rumor mill. I am merely trying to show the information that is available to us right now at this current state in the next generation. I am Centurion1307 and I want to thank you for tuning in today and joining me on the road to next gen. And remember to game hard out there, people.